Question 1. Operational review demonstrates a driver in Ontario observes a pedestrian appearing distressed and disoriented on the shoulder of a busy highway. The driver needs to decide on the most appropriate immediate action. Option A. Immediately swerve into the oncoming lane to stop the vehicle as close to the pedestrian as possible. Option B. Continue driving to the nearest exit and report the situation to authorities later. Option C. Stop the vehicle abruptly in the traffic lane to immediately check on the pedestrian. Option D. Safely pull over to the shoulder, activate hazard lights, and then assess the situation to determine the best course of action, which may include contacting emergency services. The correct answer is D. Safely pull over to the shoulder, activate hazard lights, and then assess the situation to determine the best course of action, which may include contacting emergency services. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with the immediate need to assist a distressed individual. The driver must make a rapid judgment call that prioritizes safety and legality, while also demonstrating civic responsibility. The challenge lies in interpreting the nuances of traffic regulations in a situation that deviates from routine driving. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately stopping the vehicle in a safe location off the roadway, activating hazard lights, and then assessing the situation to determine the appropriate course of action, which may include calling emergency services. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the safety of the driver, other road users, and the distressed individual by removing the vehicle from active traffic. It also ensures that the driver can then safely and effectively offer assistance or summon professional help without further endangering themselves or others. This aligns with the fundamental principles of safe driving and responsible citizenship, which are implicitly expected of all licensed drivers in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. Stopping abruptly in a traffic lane without activating hazard lights is incorrect because it creates an immediate and severe hazard to other vehicles, potentially leading to a collision. This action directly violates basic traffic safety regulations designed to prevent accidents. Continuing to drive to the destination without stopping to investigate the distressed pedestrian is incorrect because it demonstrates a disregard for the well-being of another person, which, while not a direct traffic violation in itself, falls short of expected civic duty and ethical conduct. In certain circumstances, failing to offer reasonable assistance when able to do so without undue risk could be viewed critically. Pulling over immediately into the oncoming lane to stop is incorrect because it creates a direct conflict with oncoming traffic, posing a significant risk of a head-on collision. This action is a clear violation of traffic laws concerning lane usage and safe stopping procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that first assesses immediate safety risks. This involves identifying potential hazards to oneself and others. Next, they should consider legal obligations and regulations, such as traffic laws regarding stopping and assisting. Finally, they should evaluate ethical considerations, such as the duty of care and the responsibility to help others when it can be done safely. In this case, the framework dictates prioritizing a safe stop before any other action. Question 2. Investigation of a driver's response to a pedestrian approaching a roadway in Ontario. What is the most appropriate decision-making approach when the pedestrian's intentions are unclear? Option A. Continue at the current speed, assuming the pedestrian will not enter the roadway. Option B. Sound the horn loudly to alert the pedestrian to the approaching vehicle. Option C. Slow down and prepare to stop if the pedestrian enters the roadway, while maintaining observation. Option D. Apply the brakes forcefully and immediately to ensure the vehicle stops before reaching the pedestrian. The correct answer is C. Slow down and prepare to stop if the pedestrian enters the roadway while maintaining observation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to make a split-second decision under pressure, balancing immediate safety with adherence to traffic laws and the potential for a minor infraction. The presence of a pedestrian, even if seemingly unaware, introduces an element of uncertainty that demands careful judgment. The driver must consider their duty of care to other road users and the potential consequences of their actions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves slowing down and preparing to stop if necessary, while maintaining a clear observation of the pedestrian's intentions. This approach prioritizes safety by acknowledging the potential hazard and giving the driver ample time to react appropriately. It aligns with the fundamental principle of defensive driving, which emphasizes anticipating potential dangers and acting to avoid them. In Ontario, the Highway Traffic Act mandates that drivers must yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk, and even outside of a designated crosswalk, drivers have a general duty to exercise reasonable care to avoid collisions. This proactive approach demonstrates this care. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding at normal speed without slowing down is incorrect because it disregards the potential hazard posed by the pedestrian. This action fails to exercise reasonable care and could lead to a collision, violating the driver's duty of care and potentially contravening the Highway Traffic Act's general provisions on safe driving. Slamming on the brakes abruptly without assessing the pedestrian's movement is incorrect because it could create a hazard for following vehicles. While it might avoid a collision with the pedestrian, it introduces a new risk of a rear-end collision, demonstrating a failure to consider the broader traffic environment and the safety of other road users. Honking the horn aggressively to alert the pedestrian is incorrect because it can startle the pedestrian, potentially causing them to react unpredictably and even step into the path of the vehicle. This approach prioritizes startling the pedestrian over a controlled and safe reaction, which is not in line with responsible driving practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adheres to legal requirements, and considers the broader context. This involves 1. Hazard identification, recognizing the potential hazard, the pedestrian. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of a collision. 3. Option generation, considering various responses. 4. Option evaluation, assessing each option against safety, legal, and ethical considerations. 5. Decision and action, selecting and executing the safest and most legally compliant option. 6. Review, reflecting on the outcome to improve future decision-making. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that when a child unexpectedly darts into the roadway in Ontario, a driver's immediate reaction can significantly impact the outcome. Considering the principles of safe driving and the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which of the following responses represents the most responsible and legally sound decision-making process? Option A. Maintain current speed and direction, assuming the child will stop before reaching the vehicle. Option B. Swerve sharply to the side without braking, hoping to miss the child, even if it means entering oncoming traffic or a ditch. Option C. Slam on the brakes as hard as possible without any steering input, regardless of the risk of losing control or being rear-ended. Option D. Apply the brakes firmly and if a collision is imminent, steer to avoid the child only if the maneuver can be executed, without creating a greater hazard to oneself or others. The correct answer is D. Apply the brakes firmly, and if a collision is imminent, steer to avoid the child only if the maneuver can be executed without creating a greater hazard to oneself or others. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make a split-second decision under pressure, balancing personal safety with adherence to traffic laws and the safety of others. The presence of a child entering the roadway unexpectedly creates a high-stakes situation where immediate action is necessary, but the consequences of that action must be carefully considered to avoid further danger. The driver must assess the situation rapidly, considering factors like vehicle speed, braking distance, potential evasive maneuvers, and the presence of other road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the avoidance of a collision with the child, while also minimizing the risk to the driver and other road users. This means applying the brakes firmly and steering to avoid the child if a collision is imminent, but only if such a maneuver can be executed safely. This approach aligns with the fundamental principle of defensive driving, which emphasizes anticipating hazards and taking appropriate action to mitigate risks. In Ontario, the Highway Traffic Act mandates drivers to operate their vehicles with reasonable care and attention, and to avoid collisions. This approach directly addresses the immediate hazard while considering the broader safety implications, reflecting a responsible and legally compliant decision-making process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to brake abruptly without considering steering, potentially causing the driver to lose control or be rear-ended by another vehicle, thereby creating a secondary collision. This fails to account for the overall safety of the situation and could lead to more severe consequences than a controlled evasive maneuver. Another incorrect approach is to swerve sharply without braking, which could lead to a loss of control, a rollover, or a collision with oncoming traffic or roadside obstacles. This action prioritizes avoiding the child at all costs without a proper assessment of the risks associated with the evasive maneuver itself, potentially causing greater harm. A further incorrect approach is to do nothing and hope the child stops, which is a passive and negligent response to an immediate and foreseeable hazard. This demonstrates a failure to exercise reasonable care and attention, directly contravening the driver's legal and ethical obligations to operate their vehicle safely and to avoid collisions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves rapid hazard identification, risk assessment, and the selection of the safest course of action. This framework includes 1. Perceive the hazard child entering the road. 2. Predict the outcome potential collision. 3. Decide on the best course of action, controlled braking and steering if necessary. 4. Execute the action safely and effectively. This systematic approach, grounded in defensive driving principles and legal requirements, ensures that decisions are made with a comprehensive understanding of potential consequences. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that during a Cavan driving test, the examiner observes the candidate failing to yield to oncoming traffic at a busy intersection, resulting in another vehicle having to brake sharply to avoid a collision. The examiner notes this as a significant safety concern. Option A. The examiner passes the candidate, considering their overall driving performance to be satisfactory, and decides not to record the yielding incident as it was a single occurrence. Option B. The examiner fails the candidate based on a minor issue with the candidate's parking, while overlooking the failure to yield at the intersection. Option C. The examiner fails the candidate, clearly documenting the failure to yield as a serious fault according to the Cavan driver testing regulations, and explains the decision to the candidate at the conclusion of the test. Option D. The examiner discusses the yielding incident at length with the candidate during the test, attempting to coach them on how to react in future similar situations. The correct answer is C. The examiner fails the candidate, clearly documenting the failure to yield as a serious fault according to the Cavan driver testing regulations, and explains the decision to the candidate at the conclusion of the test. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a driver, Mr. Henderson, is undergoing his Cavan driving test. The challenge lies in the examiner's observation of a potentially unsafe maneuver and the subsequent decision-making process regarding the test outcome. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance adherence to the Cavan driver testing regulations with the responsibility of ensuring public safety and maintaining the integrity of the licensing process. The examiner must make a judgment call based on observable behavior and established criteria, avoiding personal bias or undue leniency. The correct approach involves the examiner accurately documenting the observed maneuver, clearly articulating the specific breach of driving standards according to the Cavan driver testing regulations, and failing the test based on that objective evidence. This is correct because the regulations are designed to ensure drivers possess the necessary skills and judgment to operate a vehicle safely. A maneuver that demonstrates a clear disregard for safety protocols, such as failing to yield appropriately at a junction, constitutes a serious fault that directly impacts road safety. The examiner's duty is to apply these regulations consistently and impartially. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the maneuver due to a perceived minor nature, or to pass the driver based on a general impression of their overall driving, despite a specific, documented safety lapse. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it undermines the purpose of the test, which is to assess competency against defined standards. Another incorrect approach would be to fail the driver based on a subjective feeling or a minor, unrelated infraction, while ignoring the more significant safety concern. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a failure to apply the Cavan driver testing regulations appropriately. A further incorrect approach would be to engage in a lengthy debate with the driver about the maneuver's severity during the test, thereby disrupting the testing environment and potentially compromising the examiner's objectivity. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective observation, adherence to established regulations, and impartial assessment. This involves a clear understanding of the criteria for faults, the ability to remain calm and focused under pressure, and the commitment to upholding the standards set by the Cavan driver testing regulations to ensure road safety for all. Question 5. In Ontario, while en route to an important appointment during a heavy snowfall, a driver notices that visibility has significantly decreased and snow is accumulating rapidly on the highway, making the road surface slippery. The driver is concerned about their ability to maintain control and stop safely. What is the most responsible course of action? Option A. Continue driving at the posted speed limit, assuming other drivers will be cautious. Option B. Pull over to a safe location and wait for conditions to improve or for assistance. Option C. Drive significantly slower than the posted speed limit to compensate for the conditions. Option D. Attempt to overtake slower-moving vehicles to make up for lost time. The correct answer is B. Pull over to a safe location and wait for conditions to improve or for assistance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to make a judgment call regarding road conditions and personal capability in potentially hazardous weather, directly impacting public safety and adherence to traffic regulations in Ontario. Driver must balance the urgency of their journey with the legal and ethical obligations to drive safely. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing safety and compliance with Ontario's Highway Traffic Act by assessing the conditions and making a responsible decision. This means if the road conditions are genuinely unsafe due to the snow, the driver should pull over to a safe location and wait for conditions to improve or for assistance. This approach aligns with the fundamental duty of care owed by all drivers to themselves, other road users, and the public, as well as the explicit provisions within the Highway Traffic Act that mandate driving in a manner that is safe for the conditions. It demonstrates responsible decision-making by acknowledging limitations imposed by the environment rather than pushing personal limits or assuming risk. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to drive at the posted speed limit, despite visibility being severely reduced and snow accumulating on the road, is a failure to adapt to the prevailing conditions. This violates the principle of safe driving and potentially contravenes sections of the Highway Traffic Act that require drivers to operate their vehicles with due regard for the safety of others and in a manner appropriate to the conditions. Demonstrates a disregard for the increased stopping distances and reduced traction caused by snow. Attempting to overtake other vehicles in these conditions is also highly dangerous and irresponsible. Reduced visibility and slippery surfaces significantly increase the risk of losing control during an overtake, leading to potential collisions. This action directly endangers other road users and is a clear breach of safe driving practices and likely violates specific provisions of the Highway Traffic Act concerning dangerous driving. Driving significantly below the speed limit without a clear, safe reason, such as a mechanical issue or an obstruction, could also be problematic if it creates a hazard for other drivers who are able to proceed safely. However, in this specific scenario, the primary concern is the inability to maintain safe control and visibility, making the decision to stop the most prudent. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk assessment framework. This involves identifying potential hazards, poor visibility, slippery roads, evaluating the severity of those hazards, and determining the appropriate response. The primary goal is always to avoid actions that could lead to harm or violate regulations. In situations of doubt or adverse conditions, erring on the side of caution and prioritizing safety and compliance is the hallmark of professional conduct. This includes understanding personal limitations and the capabilities of the vehicle under specific environmental stresses. Question 6. Compliance review shows a driver in Ontario, Canada, who has held their G2 license for 10 months and has completed a recognized driver education program. What is the most appropriate next step for this individual to determine their eligibility for the G-Road test? Option A. Book the G-Road test immediately, as the 10-month holding period is close to the typical 1-year requirement. Option B. Ask a friend who recently obtained their full driver's license in Ontario about when they were able to book their G-Road test. Option C. Consult the official Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, guidelines for the G driver's license to confirm the minimum holding period for the G2 license and any other applicable conditions. Option D. Assume that completing a driver education program shortens the standard waiting period for the G-Road test. The correct answer is C. Consult the official Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, guidelines for the G driver's license to confirm the minimum holding period for the G2 license and any other applicable conditions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Ontario, Canada, who is seeking to obtain their full driver's license. The challenge lies in understanding and correctly applying the graduated licensing system, specifically the requirements for transitioning from a G2 to a G license. Navigating the specific timeframes and conditions stipulated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, is crucial to avoid delays or invalid applications. Careful judgment is required to ensure all eligibility criteria are met before attempting the final road test. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a thorough review of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's official guidelines for the G driver's license. This includes confirming the minimum holding period for the G2 license and ensuring all other conditions, such as completing a recognized driver education program, if applicable for earlier eligibility, are satisfied. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the regulatory framework established by the MTO, which governs the licensing process in Ontario. Relying on official sources ensures accuracy and compliance, preventing potential misinterpretations of the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on anecdotal information or the experiences of friends and family. This is professionally unacceptable because informal advice may be outdated, inaccurate, or not applicable to the individual's specific circumstances. The Ontario licensing system has specific rules that must be followed precisely, and hearsay can lead to significant errors. Another incorrect approach is assuming that simply passing the G2 road test automatically qualifies an individual for the G road test after a certain period, without verifying the exact minimum holding duration for the G2 license. This is a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the mandatory waiting period stipulated by the MTO, which is a fundamental requirement for progression in the graduated licensing system. A further incorrect approach is to book the G road test as soon as the G2 license is obtained, without confirming the minimum 1-year holding period for the G2 license. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to understand the sequential nature of the Ontario graduated licensing program, leading to an invalid test booking and potential administrative issues. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach to information gathering. This involves prioritizing official government sources, such as the Ontario Ministry of Transportation website or official publications, for all licensing requirements. When in doubt, direct contact with the MTO or a licensed driving school that is familiar with the current regulations is advisable. A proactive approach to understanding and verifying all eligibility criteria before taking action, such as booking a test, is essential for professional conduct and successful navigation of regulatory processes. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates that an investment advisor in Ontario is meeting with a long-term client who has expressed a strong personal desire to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in a specific, high-risk technology stock. The advisor has reviewed the client's financial plan and believes this particular stock is not suitable given the client's moderate risk tolerance and upcoming short-term financial goals. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment, document the findings, and then present a recommendation to the client that aligns with their risk tolerance and financial goals, explaining why the preferred stock is not suitable and offering alternative investments that meet their objectives. Option B. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, as their stated preference should be prioritized to maintain client satisfaction. Option C. Advise the client that the investment is suitable because they have expressed a strong interest, without conducting an independent suitability analysis. Option D. Recommend a different, more suitable investment, but refrain from explicitly detailing why the client's preferred stock is unsuitable to avoid potentially upsetting the client. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment, document the findings, and then present a recommendation to the client that aligns with their risk tolerance and financial goals, explaining why the preferred stock is not suitable and offering alternative investments that meet their objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. The advisor must navigate the client's emotional attachment to a particular investment while ensuring the investment aligns with their financial goals and risk tolerance, as mandated by Ontario's securities regulations. A failure to do so could lead to regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance, followed by a recommendation based on that assessment, even if it contradicts the client's initial preference. This approach aligns with the principles of client-centric advice and the regulatory obligation under Ontario securities law to act in the client's best interest. It requires the advisor to educate the client on the rationale behind their recommendation, demonstrating that the advice is objective and tailored to the client's unique circumstances, not merely acquiescence to a potentially unsuitable request. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the investment solely based on the client's stated preference, without a comprehensive suitability assessment, violates the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest. This approach prioritizes client satisfaction over regulatory compliance and sound financial advice, potentially exposing the client to undue risk. Recommending a different, more suitable investment, but failing to clearly articulate the reasons for the deviation from the client's preference, or failing to document the suitability assessment, also falls short. This lack of transparency and documentation can lead to misunderstandings and regulatory scrutiny, as it does not demonstrate a robust process for ensuring client suitability. Finally, advising the client that the investment is suitable without conducting any independent analysis or suitability assessment, simply because the client expressed interest, is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's needs and objectives. This involves active listening, thorough data gathering, and a detailed suitability assessment. Recommendations should then be derived from this assessment, with clear communication to the client explaining the rationale, especially when it diverges from their initial expressed desires. Documentation of the entire process is crucial for demonstrating compliance and protecting both the client and the advisor. Question 8. Consider a scenario where a licensed driver in Ontario, Canada, is feeling significantly unwell with symptoms including dizziness and blurred vision, but needs to travel a short distance to pick up essential medication. What is the most responsible course of action according to Ontario's traffic laws and safe driving principles? Option A. Drive cautiously, believing the symptoms are minor and will pass quickly, as the destination is nearby. Option B. Drive the short distance, as familiarity with the route mitigates the risk of impairment. Option C. Drive only if absolutely necessary, assuming the risk is acceptable given the urgency of obtaining medication. Option D. Refrain from driving and arrange for alternative transportation to pick up the medication. The correct answer is D. Refrain from driving and arrange for alternative transportation to pick up the medication. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal needs with their legal and ethical obligations as a licensed driver in Ontario, Canada. The temptation to drive despite feeling unwell, especially when facing a time constraint, can lead to impaired judgment and increased risk to oneself and others. Adhering to the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario is paramount, and understanding the nuances of impairment is crucial for safe driving. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to acknowledge the potential for impaired driving due to illness and to refrain from operating a vehicle. This approach aligns directly with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which prohibits driving while impaired by any condition that affects one's ability to drive safely. Recognizing that fatigue, dizziness, or any other symptom of illness can significantly impair reaction time, judgment, and overall control of a vehicle is the cornerstone of responsible driving. Prioritizing safety over personal convenience or perceived urgency is an ethical imperative for all licensed drivers. Incorrect approach is analysis. Choosing to drive despite feeling dizzy and experiencing blurred vision is a direct violation of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. This act mandates that drivers must be in a fit condition to operate a vehicle safely. Continuing to drive under these circumstances demonstrates a disregard for the law and a failure to uphold the ethical responsibility to protect public safety. Suggesting that the symptoms are minor and likely to pass quickly, and therefore driving is acceptable, is a dangerous rationalization. It underestimates the potential impact of even mild impairment on driving ability and ignores the unpredictable nature of illness. This approach fails to consider the legal requirement for a driver to be fully capable at all times while operating a motor vehicle. Deciding to drive because the destination is close and the driver is familiar with the route is also an unacceptable approach. The Highway Traffic Act of Ontario does not provide exceptions for short distances or familiar roads when a driver's ability is compromised. Impairment affects judgment and reaction time regardless of the distance or familiarity of the route, making it inherently unsafe. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Self-assessment. Honestly evaluate one's physical and mental state. If any doubt exists about the ability to drive safely, err on the side of caution. 2. Legal obligation. Consult or recall the relevant laws such as the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which clearly prohibits impaired driving. 3. Risk assessment. Consider the potential consequences of driving while impaired, including accident, injuries, and legal penalties. 4. Alternative solutions. Explore alternative transportation options such as public transit, ride-sharing services, or asking a friend or family member for a ride. 5. Ethical responsibility. Recognize the moral duty to protect oneself and others on the road. Question 9. Upon reviewing a new driver's vehicle selection preferences in Ontario, Canada, an advisor notes that the client, a novice driver, is strongly advocating for a specific older model car known for its lower purchase price, but which lacks modern safety features and has a history of mechanical issues. The client's stated primary needs are safety and reliability. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the advisor? Option A. Proceed with recommending the older model car as requested by the client, prioritizing their stated preference over any perceived risks. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client, explaining the safety and reliability concerns of the preferred vehicle, comparing it to newer models with advanced safety features, and documenting the client's understanding and final decision. Option C. Immediately recommend a newer, more expensive vehicle that the advisor deems safest, without fully exploring the client's reasoning for their initial preference. Option D. Refuse to consider the older model car and unilaterally select a different vehicle that the advisor believes is the safest option, disregarding the client's initial input. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client, explaining the safety and reliability concerns of the preferred vehicle, comparing it to newer models with advanced safety features, and documenting the client's understanding and final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance while adhering to regulatory requirements and ethical principles. The specific jurisdiction of Ontario, Canada, dictates the framework for this professional judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client about the implications of their preferred vehicle choice. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent. The advisor should clearly explain the safety features, operational differences, and potential risks associated with the chosen vehicle, compared to alternatives that might better align with the client's stated need for safety and reliability. This includes referencing Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and relevant Ministry of Transportation guidelines regarding vehicle safety standards and driver responsibilities. The advisor must ensure the client understands that, while their preference is noted, the ultimate recommendation will be based on a comprehensive assessment of their needs and the safety of the vehicle, documented thoroughly. This upholds the advisor's duty of care and ensures the client is making a decision with full awareness of the consequences. Incorrect approach is analysis. Choosing the vehicle solely based on the client's stated preference without further discussion or assessment fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care. This approach disregards the potential for the client to be misinformed or to prioritize factors other than safety and reliability, which are critical for a new driver. It could lead to the client operating a vehicle that is less safe than appropriate, potentially violating the spirit of Ontario's road safety regulations. Recommending a different vehicle without fully exploring the client's reasoning for their preference and attempting to educate them on alternatives is also professionally unsound. While the advisor may believe they know best, this approach can alienate the client and undermine trust. It bypasses the crucial step of collaborative decision-making and informed consent, which is a cornerstone of ethical client advisory. Refusing to consider the client's preference at all and unilaterally selecting a vehicle, even if deemed safer, is overly paternalistic and disrespectful of the client's autonomy. This approach fails to engage the client in the decision-making process and could lead to dissatisfaction and a breakdown in the professional relationship without adequately addressing the client's initial input. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric approach that balances client autonomy with their fiduciary duty. This involves active listening, thorough needs assessment, clear communication of risks and benefits, and collaborative decision-making. All advice and recommendations, especially concerning safety-critical decisions like vehicle selection for a new driver, must be grounded in regulatory requirements and ethical principles, and meticulously documented. The process should empower the client to make an informed choice, with the advisor acting as a trusted guide. Question 10. When evaluating a driver's understanding of safe stopping distances on a wet road surface in County Cavan, Ireland, a driving instructor is presented with the following scenario. A car is traveling at 80 km/h. The driver's reaction time to perceive a hazard and apply the brakes is 1.5 seconds. The braking distance on the wet surface is estimated to be 40 meters. What is the total stopping distance? Option A, approximately 55.6 meters. Option B, approximately 80 meters. Option C, approximately 71.6 meters. Option D, approximately 40 meters. Correct answer is C, approximately 71.6 meters. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate the stopping distance of a vehicle under specific conditions, demonstrating an understanding of physics principles relevant to safe driving. Miscalculation can lead to an underestimation of the distance needed to stop, potentially resulting in dangerous situations on the road. The Cavan driver's test, governed by the Road Safety Authority, RSA in Ireland, emphasizes practical application of knowledge, including the physics of motion, to ensure road safety. The correct approach involves applying the fundamental physics formula for stopping distance, which accounts for both reaction time and braking distance. This formula, derived from principles of kinematics and friction, is the standard for assessing a driver's understanding of how to safely stop a vehicle. Specifically, it requires calculating the distance traveled during the driver's reaction time and adding it to the distance traveled while the brakes are applied. This method directly aligns with the RSA's mandate to ensure drivers possess the knowledge necessary to operate vehicles safely, as understanding stopping distances is crucial for maintaining safe following distances and reacting appropriately to hazards. An incorrect approach would be to only consider the braking distance and ignore the distance traveled during the driver's reaction time. This failure to account for the time it takes a driver to perceive a hazard and initiate braking is a significant omission. It leads to an underestimation of the total stopping distance, which is a direct contravention of safe driving principles and the spirit of the RSA's regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to use an arbitrary or simplified estimation without applying the relevant physics formula. This lacks the scientific rigor required and does not demonstrate a true understanding of the factors influencing stopping distance, making it unreliable for safe driving decisions. Finally, an approach that incorrectly applies the physics formula, perhaps by misinterpreting variables or using incorrect units, would also be unacceptable. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the underlying principles, leading to inaccurate calculations and potentially unsafe driving judgments. Professionals should approach such questions by first identifying the core concept being tested, stopping distance. They should then recall or derive the relevant physics formula, ensuring all components, reaction distance and braking distance, are included. Next, they must carefully extract the given values from the question, ensuring correct units are used. Finally, they should perform the calculation systematically, double-checking each step to ensure accuracy. This methodical process, grounded in scientific principles and regulatory objectives, ensures a correct and safe outcome. Question 11. The analysis reveals that during a driving lesson in Ontario, a student begins to exhibit slurred speech, unsteady movements, and a general lack of focus, raising concerns about their ability to operate a vehicle safely. what is the most responsible course of action for the driving instructor? Option A. Immediately end the driving lesson, ensure the student's immediate safety, and arrange for them to get home without driving. Option B. Continue the lesson but with increased supervision, assuming the student can still manage the vehicle. Option C. Suggest the student take a short break and then resume the lesson to see if their condition improves. Option D. Allow the student to drive themselves home if they insist they are fine, despite the observed symptoms. Correct answer is A. Immediately end the driving lesson, ensure the student's immediate safety, and arrange for them to get home without driving. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge faced by driving instructors in Ontario, Canada, when a student exhibits signs of distress or potential impairment during a lesson. The professional challenge lies in balancing the student's immediate well-being and safety with the legal and ethical obligations of the instructor. A hasty decision could endanger the student and others, while an overly lenient approach could also lead to a dangerous situation. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation accurately and act responsibly. The correct approach involves prioritizing immediate safety and adhering to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and Ministry of Transportation guidelines. This means recognizing that a student exhibiting signs of potential impairment or severe distress is not in a fit state to operate a vehicle safely. The instructor must immediately cease the lesson, ensure the student's safety, and arrange for them to get home without driving. This aligns with the instructor's duty of care and the legal requirement to only permit licensed and competent individuals to drive. An incorrect approach would be to continue the lesson despite clear signs of impairment or distress. This directly violates the instructor's responsibility to ensure safe driving practices and could lead to a serious accident, resulting in legal repercussions and ethical condemnation. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the student's condition and allow them to drive home alone if they appear capable, even if there are underlying concerns. This fails to adequately assess the risk and could have severe consequences. Finally, pressuring the student to continue the lesson or downplaying their condition to avoid inconvenience is unprofessional and ethically unsound, as it prioritizes the lesson over the student's safety and the public's well-being. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear assessment of the student's condition. If there are any doubts about their ability to drive safely due to physical, mental, or emotional distress, the lesson must be terminated. The instructor should then focus on ensuring the student's safe return home, which may involve contacting a family member or friend, or arranging alternative transportation. Documentation of the incident and the actions taken is also crucial for professional accountability. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a potential hazard developing ahead on the highway in Ontario, but the exact nature of the danger is unclear. As a driver, what is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action to take? Option A. Slow down significantly, activate hazard lights, and only change lanes if absolutely necessary and safe to do so, while maintaining constant observation. Option B. Stop the vehicle abruptly in the current lane of travel to assess the situation. Option C. Continue at the normal speed limit, but keep hazard lights activated to warn other drivers of the potential issue. Option D. Immediately change lanes to avoid the perceived hazard without slowing down or further assessment. The correct answer is A. Slow down significantly, activate hazard lights, and only change lanes if absolutely necessary and safe to do so, while maintaining constant observation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with the immediate need to respond to a potential emergency. The driver must make a rapid judgment call that could have significant consequences for public safety and their own legal standing. The core challenge lies in interpreting the urgency of the situation and determining if it constitutes a genuine emergency that might permit deviation from standard driving practices in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves cautiously proceeding while prioritizing safety and minimizing disruption. This means slowing down significantly, activating hazard lights to alert other road users, and making a clear, deliberate decision to only deviate from the normal lane if absolutely necessary and safe to do so, while remaining vigilant for any signs of actual danger. This approach aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's general duty to drive safely and avoid collisions, and its provisions for emergency vehicles, which, while not directly applicable to a civilian driver, underscore the principle of prioritizing safety and clear communication during potentially hazardous situations. The driver's primary obligation is to operate their vehicle in a manner that does not endanger themselves or others, and to signal their intentions clearly. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding at normal speed with hazard lights on is incorrect because it fails to adequately reduce risk in a potentially hazardous situation and does not signal a clear intention to deviate from normal driving. It creates ambiguity for other drivers. Immediately swerving into another lane without slowing down or assessing the situation is highly dangerous and a direct violation of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's requirement to drive safely and maintain control of the vehicle. It poses an immediate risk of collision. Stopping the vehicle abruptly in the lane of travel is also incorrect, as it creates a sudden and unexpected hazard for following traffic, potentially leading to a rear-end collision, and is not a safe or lawful response to a perceived but unconfirmed emergency. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and clear communication. When faced with an ambiguous situation that might be an emergency, the process should involve 1. Immediate risk assessment. Is there an immediate and verifiable danger? 2. Gradual de-escalation of speed. Slow down to allow for better observation and reaction time. 3. Clear signaling. Use hazard lights to alert others to a potential issue. 4. Controlled deviation only if necessary and safe. If a lane change is required, it must be done with extreme caution and only when a clear path is available and the deviation is justified by a confirmed hazard. 5. Continuous observation. Remain alert for further developments and be prepared to adjust the response. Question 13. Implementation of a client's stated investment preference in Ontario, which appears to carry a higher risk profile than the client's previously established risk tolerance, requires careful consideration of regulatory obligations. What is the most appropriate course of action for an investment advisor in Ontario when a client requests an investment that seems inconsistent with their stated risk profile? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred investment immediately to respect their autonomy and avoid potential client dissatisfaction. Option B. Dismiss the client's preference and insist on a different investment that the advisor deems more suitable without extensive explanation of the alternative. Option C. Focus solely on the potential for higher returns of the client's preferred investment, assuming the client understands the inherent risks. Option D. Clearly explain the risks and potential downsides of the client's preferred investment, referencing Ontario's suitability obligations, and document the discussion to ensure informed consent. The correct answer is D. Clearly explain the risks and potential downsides of the client's preferred investment, referencing Ontario's suitability obligations, and document the discussion to ensure informed consent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this by prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical obligations over immediate client satisfaction if the client's request is detrimental. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with the advisor's responsibility to provide sound, regulated advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining to the client the risks and potential downsides of their preferred investment strategy, referencing the specific disclosure requirements and suitability obligations under Ontario's securities regulations. This approach prioritizes educating the client about the implications of their choices, ensuring they make an informed decision. It directly addresses the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest by providing comprehensive information, allowing the client to weigh the risks and benefits with full understanding, and documenting this discussion thoroughly to demonstrate compliance with regulatory expectations for suitability and client understanding. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that immediately proceeds with the client's preferred investment without further discussion or explanation fails to meet the suitability requirements mandated by Ontario securities law. It neglects the advisor's fiduciary duty to ensure investments align with the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and investment knowledge, potentially exposing the client to undue risk. An approach that dismisses the client's preference outright and insists on a different investment without a thorough explanation of the rationale and potential benefits of the alternative while also failing to address the client's stated interest, can be seen as paternalistic and may not fully respect client autonomy. While the advisor has a duty to recommend suitable investments, the communication and client engagement process is crucial and must be handled with sensitivity and transparency. An approach that focuses solely on the potential for higher returns without adequately disclosing the associated increased risks and volatility, and without confirming this aligns with the client's risk profile, violates the principles of full and fair disclosure and suitability. This can lead to misaligned expectations and potential client dissatisfaction or financial harm if the investment underperforms or experiences significant downturns. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's stated objectives and preferences. This is followed by an assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge. The advisor then identifies suitable investment options that align with these factors, adhering strictly to regulatory requirements like those in Ontario. If a client's preference deviates from suitable options, the professional's duty is to engage in a transparent and educational dialogue, clearly outlining the pros and cons of all options, including the client's preference, and documenting the entire process. This ensures informed consent and upholds the advisor's fiduciary and regulatory obligations. Question 14. While driving on Highway 401 in Ontario, a driver begins to experience sudden, severe chest pain and dizziness. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action to take immediately? Option A. Drive to a friend's house a few kilometers away to seek help there. Option B. Continue driving to the nearest pharmacy to get over-the-counter medication for the symptoms. Option C. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the road as soon as it is safe to do so and call for emergency medical assistance. Option D. Attempt to manage the symptoms by taking deep breaths and focusing intently on the road, hoping they will pass. The correct answer is C. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the road as soon as it is safe to do so and call for emergency medical assistance. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal needs with adherence to traffic laws and the safety of others. The driver is experiencing a medical emergency, which can impair judgment and reaction time, making it critical to prioritize safety and legal compliance over personal urgency. Careful judgment is required to determine the most appropriate course of action that minimizes risk to themselves and the public. The best professional practice involves immediately pulling over to a safe location and contacting emergency services. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the medical emergency in a manner that prioritizes safety and complies with the fundamental principles of road safety regulations in Ontario. By stopping the vehicle safely, the driver prevents potential accidents caused by impaired driving. Contacting emergency services ensures that the driver receives the necessary medical attention promptly and legally, without endangering other road users. This aligns with the overarching goal of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act to ensure the safe operation of vehicles on public roads. An incorrect approach would be to continue driving to a destination, such as a pharmacy or a friend's house, even if it seems close. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the immediate safety risks associated with driving while experiencing a medical emergency. The driver's ability to control the vehicle could deteriorate rapidly, leading to a collision. This action violates the duty of care owed to other road users and contravenes the spirit and letter of traffic laws designed to prevent impaired or unsafe driving. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to self-diagnose or manage the medical condition while continuing to drive. This is professionally unacceptable as it places the driver and others at significant risk. Driving requires full attention and cognitive capacity, which are likely compromised during a medical emergency. Attempting to drive under such circumstances demonstrates a failure to recognize the severity of the situation and a disregard for the potential consequences. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the symptoms and continue driving as if nothing is wrong, hoping the symptoms will pass. This is professionally unacceptable because it represents a willful disregard for personal safety and the safety of the public. The potential for sudden incapacitation or impaired driving ability is high, and failing to take preventative action is a serious lapse in judgment and responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. recognizing and assessing the immediate risk posed by the situation. 2. Understanding the relevant legal and ethical obligations, in this case, Ontario's traffic laws and the duty of care. 3. Evaluating available options based on their potential to mitigate risk and uphold obligations. 4. Selecting the option that best balances immediate needs with long-term safety and legal adherence. In situations involving potential impairment or medical emergencies, the default action should always be to cease driving and seek appropriate assistance. Question 15. Examination of the data shows that a client in Ontario has expressed a strong preference for a high-risk, speculative investment strategy that aligns with their stated desire for rapid capital growth. Despite the advisor's assessment indicating this strategy carries a significantly higher probability of capital loss than other available options, which of the following approaches best demonstrates adherence to the regulatory framework and ethical obligations of an investment advisor in Ontario? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred high-risk strategy as requested, assuming the client fully understands the implications of their choice. Option B. Agree to implement the client's preferred strategy immediately to satisfy the client's request, without further discussion or documentation of the risks involved. Option C. Thoroughly explain the potential risks and rewards of the client's preferred strategy, present alternative, potentially more suitable investment options with a clear comparison of their risk/return profiles, and meticulously document all discussions and the client's final decision. Option D. Recommend a more conservative investment strategy that the advisor deems appropriate, without extensively detailing the risks of the client's preferred strategy or exploring the client's rationale for it. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly explain the potential risks and rewards of the client's preferred strategy, present alternative, potentially more suitable investment options with a clear comparison of their risk/return profiles, and meticulously document all discussions and the client's final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference might lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. Navigating this requires careful judgment to balance client autonomy with regulatory obligations and ethical principles. The advisor must ensure that any recommendation is suitable and that the client's understanding is complete, without succumbing to undue influence or pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly explaining the risks and benefits of the client's preferred investment strategy, comparing it objectively with alternative, potentially more suitable options, and documenting this discussion comprehensively. This approach aligns with the advisor's fiduciary duty under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations, which mandate that advisors act honestly, in good faith, and with a view to the best interests of the client. It also adheres to the ethical guidelines of the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization, CIRO, emphasizing suitability and client understanding. By providing a clear, documented rationale for recommendations and ensuring the client is fully informed, the advisor upholds their professional responsibilities. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending the client's preferred strategy without a detailed discussion of its potential downsides and alternatives fails to meet the duty of care and suitability requirements under OSC regulations. This approach prioritizes client preference over the advisor's professional judgment and regulatory obligations. Proceeding with the client's preferred strategy solely based on their insistence, without adequate disclosure and documentation of the risks, constitutes a failure to act in the client's best interest and could lead to regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach involves dismissing the client's preference outright and imposing a different strategy, without exploring the client's rationale or providing a clear, comparative explanation. This demonstrates a lack of respect for client autonomy and can undermine trust, potentially violating ethical principles of client-centric advice. Finally, agreeing to the client's request without any documentation or further discussion, assuming the client understands the risks, is a significant breach of professional conduct and regulatory requirements, as it leaves no record of due diligence or informed consent. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance, followed by a thorough assessment of suitable investment options. This assessment must be communicated clearly to the client, highlighting the pros and cons of each option including the client's preferred strategy. All discussions, recommendations, and client decisions must be meticulously documented to demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. If a client insists on a strategy that appears unsuitable, the advisor must engage in a deeper dialogue to understand the underlying reasons, provide comprehensive risk disclosures, and document the client's informed decision, even if it deviates from the advisor's primary recommendation. Question 16. Research into the Cavan driver's test indicates that examiners must assess a driver's ability to react to unexpected road events. If during a test drive in County Cavan, a driver encounters a situation where a cyclist suddenly swerves into their path from a side road, what is the most appropriate action for the examiner to take to effectively assess the driver's hazard perception and reaction skills? Option A. Create a similar, but less dangerous, scenario immediately afterwards to see if the driver can replicate a safe response. Option B. Ask the driver to describe what they would do in such a situation after the event has passed. Option C. Observe the driver's immediate reaction, noting their braking, steering, and overall vehicle control, intervening only if an accident is imminent. Option D. Immediately instruct the driver to brake firmly, regardless of their initial reaction, to ensure safety. The correct answer is C. Observe the driver's immediate reaction, noting their braking, steering, and overall vehicle control, intervening only if an accident is imminent. Explanation. Research into the practical application of the Cavan driver's test reveals scenarios where a driver's understanding of road rules and their ability to react appropriately are paramount. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to assess not just rote memorization of rules, but the driver's judgment and safety awareness in a dynamic environment. The examiner must balance the need to test a range of skills with ensuring the safety of the driver, the examiner, and the public. The best approach involves the examiner observing the driver's reaction to a sudden, unexpected hazard that requires immediate, safe decision-making, such as a pedestrian unexpectedly stepping into the road from behind a parked car. This approach is correct because it directly tests the driver's ability to apply their knowledge of road rules, e.g., speed limits, yielding to pedestrians in a real-time, high-pressure situation. It demonstrates whether the driver can prioritize safety, make a decisive maneuver, like braking or steering safely, and maintain control of the vehicle, all critical components of safe driving assessed in the Cavan driver's test. This aligns with the core objective of the test, to ensure drivers can operate a vehicle safely and responsibly in various conditions. An incorrect approach would be to present a hazard that is overly staged or predictable, such as a traffic cone placed in the middle of an empty road with ample warning. This fails to adequately assess the driver's ability to react to genuine, unpredictable hazards and may not reveal deficiencies in their judgment under pressure. Another incorrect approach would be to instruct the driver to perform a maneuver that is not directly related to hazard perception or reaction, such as a complex parking exercise, when a more immediate safety-critical situation arises. This deviates from the primary goal of assessing immediate hazard response. Finally, an approach that involves the examiner intervening too quickly or unnecessarily before the driver has had a reasonable opportunity to react and demonstrate their own decision-making would also be incorrect. This undermines the assessment of the driver's independent judgment and reaction capabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and the accurate assessment of critical driving skills. This involves anticipating potential hazards, understanding the driver's current skill level, and creating controlled yet realistic testing conditions. The examiner should always aim to observe the driver's natural reaction to a situation, intervening only when absolutely necessary to prevent an accident. The focus should be on assessing the driver's ability to anticipate, perceive, and respond to hazards in a manner consistent with the Cavan driver's test objectives. Question 17. In Ontario, while driving on Highway 401, you observe a person standing erratically on the shoulder of the highway, appearing distressed. Which approach would be most appropriate to ensure both safety and responsible action? Option A. Honk your vehicle's horn repeatedly to alert the individual while continuing to drive. Option B. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the highway at a reasonable distance from the individual, activate hazard lights, and assess the situation from your vehicle before deciding on further action, such as contacting emergency services. Option C. Immediately stop your vehicle in the travel lane to inquire if the person needs assistance. Option D. Continue driving at the posted speed limit without acknowledging the individual. The correct answer is B. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the highway at a reasonable distance from the individual, activate hazard lights, and assess the situation from your vehicle before deciding on further action, such as contacting emergency services. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with the immediate need to assist a distressed individual. The driver must make a swift judgment call that prioritizes safety and legal compliance, while also considering humanitarian concerns. The core of the challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when faced with a situation that could be interpreted in multiple ways, each carrying different legal and ethical implications. The best approach involves prioritizing immediate safety and legal compliance by pulling over to a safe location off the roadway and then assessing the situation. This aligns with the fundamental principles of safe driving and the legal obligation to operate a vehicle responsibly. Specifically, in Ontario, the Highway Traffic Act mandates that drivers must operate their vehicles with reasonable care and attention and avoid actions that could endanger themselves or others. Furthermore, the Act requires drivers to stop and render assistance if they are involved in or witness an accident. This is typically in the context of an actual collision. In this scenario, without a clear indication of an accident, the primary duty is to ensure the safe operation of one's own vehicle and then to assess the situation from a safe vantage point. This approach allows the driver to observe the situation without creating a hazard on the road and to then decide on the most appropriate next step, which might include calling emergency services if the situation warrants it. An incorrect approach would be to stop immediately in the travel lane of the highway. This action directly violates the principle of safe driving and creates an immediate hazard for other road users, potentially leading to a collision. It demonstrates a failure to exercise reasonable care and attention, which is a contravention of the Highway Traffic Act. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and continue driving without any attempt to assess or assist. While this avoids creating an immediate hazard, it could be ethically questionable if the individual is in genuine distress or danger. Depending on the specific circumstances and the perceived level of risk to the individual, failing to take any action might be seen as a dereliction of a basic civic duty, although it does not directly violate a specific traffic law in the absence of an accident. A further incorrect approach would be to honk the horn repeatedly and continue driving. This action is unlikely to provide effective assistance and could be perceived as aggressive or dismissive, potentially escalating the situation or causing further distress to the individual. It fails to address the core issue of potential distress and does not contribute to a safe resolution. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a rapid assessment of immediate risks, followed by a consideration of legal obligations and ethical responsibilities. The driver should first ensure their own safety and the safety of other road users. Then, they should consider the most effective and lawful way to address the observed situation, which often involves seeking assistance from appropriate authorities if direct intervention is not safe or feasible. Question 18. The control framework reveals that Mr. Henderson is preparing for his Cavan driving test, considering the official syllabus and the need for comprehensive understanding of local regulations. Which preparation strategy best ensures compliance with the Road Safety Authority's requirements for the Cavan region? Option A. Assuming that driving experience gained in another country is sufficient, with minimal need to review the specific rules and signage mandated by the Road Safety Authority for the Cavan test. Option B. Concentrating on practicing complex driving maneuvers and advanced techniques, believing that proficiency in these areas will compensate for a less detailed review of basic road rules and signage. Option C. Actively studying the official Cavan driving test syllabus and supplementary RSA materials, focusing on understanding and applying all relevant road signs and traffic regulations specific to Ireland. Option D. Relying primarily on advice and tips from friends who have recently passed their driving tests in Cavan, assuming their experiences cover all necessary aspects. The correct answer is C. Actively studying the official Cavan driving test syllabus and supplementary RSA materials, focusing on understanding and applying all relevant road signs and traffic regulations specific to Ireland. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a driver, Mr. Henderson, is preparing for his Cavan driving test. The challenge lies in ensuring Mr. Henderson fully understands and adheres to the specific road signage and traffic regulations pertinent to the Cavan region, as outlined by the Road Safety Authority, RSA, in Ireland. This requires not just rote memorization, but a practical application of knowledge in a real-world context, which is the essence of the driving test. The best approach involves Mr. Henderson actively engaging with the official Cavan driving test syllabus and supplementary materials provided by the RSA. This includes studying the rules of the road, understanding the meaning and application of all road signs encountered in Cavan, and practicing maneuvers in conditions that simulate the test environment. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the stated objectives of the Cavan driving test, which is to assess a candidate's competence and knowledge of Irish road traffic law and safe driving practices, as mandated by the RSA. Ethical considerations also support this, as it demonstrates a commitment to safety and responsible driving, fulfilling the duty of care to oneself and other road users. An incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to rely solely on informal advice from friends who have recently passed their Cavan test. While anecdotal advice might offer some insights, it lacks the authority and comprehensiveness of the official syllabus. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the regulatory requirements set by the RSA, potentially leading to gaps in knowledge and an incomplete understanding of specific Cavan road conditions or regulations that might differ subtly from other regions. It also fails to meet the ethical standard of thorough preparation. Another incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to focus exclusively on practicing advanced driving techniques without a solid foundation in basic road rules and signage relevant to Cavan. The driving test prioritizes fundamental safety and adherence to regulations. Overemphasis on advanced skills without mastering the basics is a failure to meet the core assessment criteria of the RSA. This is ethically unsound as it prioritizes personal ambition over the safety of others by neglecting essential knowledge. A final incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to assume that his driving experience in another country directly translates to the requirements of the Cavan driving test without specific study of Irish regulations. While general driving skills are transferable, each jurisdiction has unique traffic laws, signage, and driving culture. Relying on prior experience without consulting the RSA's official materials for Cavan is a significant oversight and a failure to meet the regulatory requirements for obtaining a license in Ireland. This is professionally irresponsible and ethically questionable, as it puts others at risk due to a lack of specific knowledge. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes understanding and adhering to the specific regulatory framework of the jurisdiction. This involves identifying the governing body, RSA, consulting official documentation, syllabus, rules of the road, and engaging in practice that directly mirrors the assessment criteria. When faced with information from informal sources, a critical evaluation against official guidelines is essential. The ultimate goal is to ensure competence and safety, which is achieved through diligent and regulation-compliant preparation. Question 19. The control framework reveals that Mr. Henderson, a resident of Ontario, Canada, is preparing for his G2 driver's license road test and feels particularly anxious about his parallel parking abilities, despite extensive practice. Considering the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO examination standards and ethical conduct expected of applicants, which of the following actions best represents a professional and compliant approach to managing this situation? Option A. Mr. Henderson should ask his father to provide subtle verbal cues or gestures to assist him during the parallel parking portion of the test. Option B. Mr. Henderson should inform the examiner of his specific concerns regarding parallel parking before the test commences, allowing for a focused evaluation and potential feedback. Option C. Mr. Henderson should simply hope for the best during the parallel parking segment and avoid mentioning his anxiety to the examiner. Option D. Mr. Henderson should request a different examiner, believing that a new examiner might be less critical of his parallel parking skills. The correct answer is B. Mr. Henderson should inform the examiner of his specific concerns regarding parallel parking before the test commences, allowing for a focused evaluation and potential feedback. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a driver, Mr. Henderson, is seeking to obtain his full driver's license in Ontario, Canada. He has been practicing extensively with his father, who is a licensed driver, but Mr. Henderson is concerned about his ability to parallel park under pressure. This situation is professionally challenging because the driving test in Ontario, administered by the Ministry of Transportation, MTO, is designed to assess a driver's competency and adherence to road safety regulations. The examiner's role is to objectively evaluate the applicant's skills, and any attempt to unduly influence or misrepresent the situation undermines the integrity of the licensing process and public safety. The best approach involves Mr. Henderson honestly communicating his concerns about parallel parking to the examiner before the test begins. This approach is correct because it demonstrates transparency and a commitment to the licensing process. The MTO's Driver's Handbook and the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario emphasize the importance of honesty and accurate representation during the licensing process. By proactively informing the examiner, Mr. Henderson allows for a more focused assessment of his skills, potentially leading to constructive feedback on his parallel parking. This also respects the examiner's role in conducting a fair and thorough evaluation. An incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to ask his father to subtly guide him through the parallel parking maneuver during the test. This is professionally unacceptable, as it constitutes an attempt to circumvent the testing process and deceive the examiner. It violates the principle of honest representation and undermines the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills to operate a vehicle safely. Furthermore, it could be interpreted as an attempt to gain an unfair advantage, which is unethical and against the spirit of the licensing regulations. Another incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to avoid any mention of his parallel parking concerns and hope for the best, potentially failing the test and having to retake it. While not actively deceptive, this approach fails to leverage the opportunity for constructive feedback. The MTO's testing system is designed to identify areas for improvement. By not communicating his specific anxieties, Mr. Henderson misses a chance to receive targeted advice that could help him overcome his weakness, potentially leading to repeated failures and increased frustration. A final incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to request a different examiner, believing a new person might be more lenient on parallel parking. This is professionally unacceptable as it implies a lack of faith in the impartiality of the MTO examiners and attempts to shop for a favorable outcome rather than focusing on skill development. The MTO's examination standards are consistent across all examiners, and seeking to avoid a fair assessment based on perceived leniency is contrary to the principles of a standardized and objective testing system. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing honesty, transparency, and a commitment to the regulatory framework. This involves understanding the purpose of the regulations and tests, and acting in a manner that upholds their integrity. When faced with a personal challenge related to a regulated process, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific requirement or skill in question. 2. Assessing personal readiness and any anxieties. 3. Considering the most transparent and honest way to address the situation within the regulatory guidelines. 4. Seeking constructive feedback or guidance if permitted and appropriate, rather than attempting to circumvent the process. Question 20. The control framework reveals that a driver in Ontario, Canada, is being evaluated on their understanding of speed limits. If a driver travels a distance of 1.5 kilometers in 1 minute and 30 seconds, and the posted speed limit for that section of road is 80 kilometers per hour, what is the driver's average speed in kilometers per hour, and are they in violation of the speed limit? Option A. The driver's average speed is 60 kilometers per hour, and they are not in violation of the speed limit. Option B. The driver's average speed is 90 kilometers per hour, and they are in violation of the speed limit. Option C. The driver's average speed is 75 kilometers per hour, and they are not in violation of the speed limit. Option D. The driver's average speed is 80 kilometers per hour, and they are not in violation of the speed limit. Correct answer is A. The driver's average speed is 60 kilometers per hour, and they are not in violation of the speed limit. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a driver's ability to safely operate a vehicle is being assessed, with a particular emphasis on understanding speed limits and their practical application in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires not only knowledge of the law, but also the ability to apply mathematical concepts to real-world driving situations, ensuring the safety of the driver and others on the road. Careful judgment is required to balance adherence to regulations with the practicalities of traffic flow and road conditions. The best professional approach involves accurately calculating the average speed over a measured distance and comparing it to the posted speed limit. This method directly addresses the core of the question by using a defined distance and time to determine the actual speed of travel. This is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of traffic law, which are based on maintaining safe speeds within designated limits. In Ontario, the Highway Traffic Act (HTA) defines speed limits, and exceeding them is an offense. Calculating average speed provides an objective measure of compliance. This approach demonstrates a thorough understanding of how speed is measured and regulated, ensuring that the driver's actions are demonstrably within legal parameters. An incorrect approach would be to estimate the speed based on the driver's perception or by simply stating the posted speed limit without any calculation. Estimating speed is unreliable and does not provide objective evidence of compliance. Simply stating the posted speed limit fails to address the actual speed of travel, which is the critical factor in determining an offense. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the time taken to cover the distance without relating it to the speed limit. While time and distance are related to speed, without the calculation of speed itself, this approach is incomplete and does not provide a basis for assessing compliance with speed regulations. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective measurement and regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the relevant laws, e.g., Ontario's HTA, identifying the key variables distance, time, applying the correct mathematical formula, speed equals distance/time, and comparing the calculated result to the legal standard, posted speed limit. If the calculated speed exceeds the limit, the driver is in violation. This systematic approach ensures that judgments are based on facts and regulations, promoting safety and legal adherence.